Think about how full I am with emotion, not just for George Floyd, but the many African Americans that have suffered the same fate as George Floyd. I'm thinking about protests in my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, the equality expressed in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that I've sworn my adult life to support and defend. And thinking about a history of racial issues and my own experiences that didn't always sing of liberty and equality. I'm thinking about how my nomination provides some hope, but also comes with a heavy burden.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, the man you just heard from, General Charles Q. Brown Jr., known as General C.Q. Brown, delivered that message about how complicated his feelings were in the moment, about being an African-American man in this country and a member of the United States military. Just a few months prior, General Brown had been nominated by Donald Trump to be the next chief of staff for the U.S. Air Force. And 3 years after that, very different president of a different party, President Joe Biden, nominated him to the role of chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the United States military's top officer. However, General C.Q. Brown was late Friday night fired by Donald Trump without any reason given and before his 4-year term was up. Illuminating reporting in the New York Times reports that Trump never got over that video we just played you of General Brown. It's something he recorded in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And in trying to understand this decision, let's listen to what the man who now sits atop the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth, said a few months ago.
The dumbest phrase on planet Earth in the military is our diversity is our strength. We got to fire, you got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever, that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go.
Any general involved in that has got to go. That wasn't it, though. He wrote a book. It was published last year, and he says this of General Brown's promotion to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quote, "Was it because of his skin color or his skill? We'll never know, but always doubt," which on its face seems unfair to CQ. But since he has made the race card one of his biggest calling cards, it doesn't really much matter. General Brown's firing was part of a Friday night purge of military brass that Trump and Pete Hegseth deemed unable to carry out Donald Trump's agenda. The first woman to ever lead the Navy, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, and General James Slife, the Vice Chief of Staff at the Air Force, were also fired, along with 3 JAGs, Judge Advocate Generals of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. One of our next guests, Stephen Lepper, who served as Deputy Legal Counsel to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, puts it like this, quote, "Lying beneath the flowery Pentagon press release and official social media posts praising the officers for their service are sinister, reckless motives that should scare every American. A desire to remove any legal guardrail that might prevent the military from doing the president's bidding without question, and a total lack of understanding of how military leaders are made and what military leaders do." What some are calling a Friday night massacre at the U.S. military is where we start the hour. Pentagon correspondent for the New York Times, Helene Cooper, joins us. She's byline on that New York Times reporting we read from. Also joining us, as we mentioned, retired U.S. Air Force Major General Stephen Lepper, who was a Deputy Judge Advocate General in the Air Force, and retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC. Amy McGrath is here. Eddie's still with us. Helene, take us through the reporting.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me. I sat down on Saturday. Friday night was crazy as we got the news. We'd been sort of anticipating this for a while. And I sat down on Saturday and watched that video that you opened the segment with again. And I watched it about 4 or 5 times because I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything in there where, in which, it's so easy to call him CQ, where General Brown, had gone off on a more of a pro-diversity rant. And there wasn't. The video that you played is a very personal story. It runs for 4 minutes and 49 seconds, in which he is talking about his own life as an African American fighter pilot in the Air Force. He talks about how he going to schools, elementary school with his sister, where they were the only two black kids in the whole school, and he felt like they didn't fit in. And then he talks about how when he was at a school with 50% minorities, he still felt like he didn't fit in. He talks about how when he was in the Air Force, he had black friends who came up to him and said, "Why are you hanging out with your squadron members? Most of them, they're all white, instead of hanging out with us." He talks about just, trying to navigate these two worlds. And it's not the sort of thing that most people would find offensive, but it did really, really anger both President Trump, because when it landed right after, it was in the middle, it was like on June 4th, I think, it was like a few days after the George Floyd killing. It electrified the Pentagon at the time, the rank and file, and also the officers. And it started, we're in the middle, if you just cast your mind back to that time, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we're in the middle of this big, huge social justice movement, and Trump was very, very angry about these Black Lives Matter protests that were going on in the streets. He was already angry at his Pentagon, at his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Mark Milley, and even his defense secretary, who had been much more pliable than the one before, Mark Esper, who both stood up to him and said, "No, you can't use the Insurrection Act to put active duty military on the streets against these Black Lives Matter protesters." And he felt like he was being stymied. And then CQ Brown, who he had just nominated to be the Air Force chief, comes out with this video, which on the face of it is pretty innocuous, but it really angered Trump, and it really angered the MAGA world. And when Pete Hegseth starts writing in his book, and when he wrote in his book, The War on Warriors, that CQ Brown needed to be fired because he said, the quote was, and you just read that out loud, he said he has made race his biggest calling card. It's that video he's talking about.
Is it true, though? I mean, what is he known for among the military men and women, Helene?
No, it's not. It's not true. I mean,
it's never true.
CQ Brown is still the same person who Trump nominated as the Air Force chief of staff in 2020 before he made that video. There's one other thing that that some of the Trump allies and the Hegseth allies point to, and that's a 2022 memo in which the Air Force, CQ Brown, the Air Force Secretary at the time, Frank Kendall, and other officials asked that the applicant pool, not the people who were actually hired, but that they asked that the applicant pool, the people who actually applied, be more reflective of America. And they put numerical targets. They wanted African Americans, they wanted Asian Americans, they wanted women, and they didn't meet any of those. They didn't meet those goals, but they wanted to make more of an effort to reach out to more underserved, underrepresented communities at the Pentagon. And the Trump people didn't like that as either. But that's it. You noted earlier that when on Friday night, when the notice finally came out that CQ Brown was being fired, there's no reason given. It's just, when you talk to the Trump people afterwards, and when we talk to them afterwards, they all say it's because the president wanted his own team, he wanted to bring his own people in. Well, the military is supposed to be like the FBI. It's not supposed to be, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is supposed to be a position that spans both, two administrations, so that you have that level of continuity, and that you're also able to credibly say that the American military is apolitical. You're not going to become president and then fire all the Democrats in the military. That would be, it's the same, similar to the FBI. But President Trump, I guess, does not really necessarily see it that way.